Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
As a sports fan, I have to confess. Sometimes the game gets kind of boring. That's when I unfold my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 and use multi-window viewing on its large screen. Boring game? I'm checking out my fantasy baseball league at the same time. Score still 1-0? I'm replying to emails in the other window, scoring points with the boss. Semifinals finally getting exciting? I'm buying tickets to the finals and booking my flights. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.
Hello and welcome to The Politics Guys, a podcast that is a place for rational debate on the issues of the day. I am Justin Holmes, a political science professor at the University of Northern Iowa, and I'm joined today by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at the Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. So we're all Northern today. Welcome, Ken. Good to talk to you.
Oh, it's great to be back. Great to see you again, Justin.
All right. Well, we've got a lot going on, so let's dig in. Where should we start? We've got a lot of things this week. Thinking Bureau of Labor Statistics, not maybe the most exciting topic in normal times, but this week we've got some news there. This week, after a lukewarm jobs report followed by some revisions of previous jobs report, Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Erica McIntyre, who had been in the position for quite some time, arguing that, gosh, they just don't get the numbers right, and we'll get somebody in there that can make correct numbers, if you will. Particularly citing the issue of the revisions. Clearly, there's a lot of pushback about that, although I don't know that there's pushback that's going to be particularly workable, because certainly this is an agency that is generally supposed to be above politics, etc. And the suspicion is, and I'd say it's probably more of a suspicion, that Trump is not particularly impressed with the integrity of data, but more interested in what those numbers say about him. So, Ken, thoughts on this situation?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different aspects of it to think about. I mean, I guess the official who was fired, Ms. Erica, I think I've heard it pronounced McIntyre, although I don't know if that's right. But
that could be too.
Yeah,
I have this problem of only reading things. Yeah. So when you get names like that, it's a little.
So she's a long time, she's a long time civil servant. I guess technically being commissioner is a political appointment, but by tradition in that agency, not a lot of politics has gone into that, because really the role of the agency is to apply standard, data collection methods and standard data analysis tools and formulae, kind of just the same as how it was applied last time. And so there's not really a lot of room in there for political manipulation. A large number of civil servants work on putting those reports together. And I think no serious person, suspects that there ever really was any data manipulation, or that if there was, that it would be possible to keep the specifics of it covered up, because people who work there would know about it. So, I don't think, the idea that he's firing her because she supposedly manipulated the data seems transparently false. So that sort of seems to raise questions about, so why is he firing her if that is transparently false? And I suppose the most obvious reason would be that he's trying to do it as a message to other civil servants, to even other of his own political appointees, other bureaucrats, that that their jobs will be at risk if they just do their job in the ordinary way, and that he's expecting them to do things like manipulate data for his political benefit, if they want to keep their jobs. I don't know how effective that's going to be as a signaling device. I don't know how many people in positions like Ms. McIntyre's or even like her own deputy. I think his name is William Wietrowski, who is now the acting commissioner. I think by virtue of Ms. McIntyre being removed. I don't expect him to start cooking numbers or anything like that. Maybe Trump will try to replace him quickly. Then there's a lot of different ways that could go in terms of if Trump wants to make a new nomination for someone to become the new permanent commissioner of the BLS. Is he going to try to appoint someone who's self-evidently unqualified and dishonest, or is he going to try to find somebody who looks? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's going to cause problems in the Senate. Now, maybe he's shown that the Senate will confirm almost anyone he puts up there, but in this case, there may be a little bit more pushback from the business community. The business community does rely on accurate statistics from the government in order to do planning and things like that. I don't think there's too many constituencies out there that want to see these numbers cooked. So there's a lot of ways that could go. That's not to say that the Senate wouldn't confirm anybody that Trump orders them to, but I do think that would be a difficult confirmation hearing if he puts in someone who's transparently illegitimate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do wonder if this isn't something that kind of would split Republican constituencies. As somebody who has an interest in data, you want good quality data, and you want to be able to trust the data. And I've never really seen much reason to doubt why that would be the case here. I think BLS is kind of gold standard of doing these things. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, but it seems to be reliable, etc. And you're absolutely right. I mean, lots of people rely on this information for any number of business purposes because they want a sense of the health of the economy before they're making big decisions. Data in general. I mean, just even like the University of Michigan consumer sentiment reports, those are huge movers of stock trading and things like that. So it seems like a lot of traditional sort of Republican constituencies here are not going to be happy about the situation if this data is less reliable. To me, it fits sort of a Trump pattern here. I mean, going back to the very beginning of his first term, with the crowd size estimates, which I think people kind of joked about at the time, and that's something that's neither here nor there. I mean, it's nothing of particular consequence. But between that and the Sharpie on the hurricane map and things like that, Trump has always been flummoxed, angry, etc., by data, reality, etc., that causes him problems, whether it's casts him in a bad light or, makes people worried about hurricanes or, what have you. And, this seems like another instance of that, where, once again, stuff comes out that doesn't line up with, him being the greatest president ever for the economy and all other things. And he immediately lashes out. He didn't have any problem with these guys, when they were giving him numbers that he liked. And for that matter, there were revisions under Biden at very inopportune times, downward revisions of some of these reports. And so, again, I think, they really are looking for quality data. I think one of those problems is those revisions. If we think about the way that we talk about these things, the headline grabber is always those kind of monthly job reports. But those are essentially first drafts. The scope of figuring out unemployment in a country this big is just a huge empirical question. As somebody that works with a little data, like I can't fathom doing that, on a monthly basis. But as more stuff comes in, more data points, etc., it's very common for numbers to be revised up or down in retrospect. And normally these don't get a lot of attention. But the Trump revisions were pretty big, the downward revisions. And of course, it's Trump, so he's going to call attention to that. And it was on the heels of or the same day as a current jobs report that was, not awful but not great, one of those like slower growths than we probably need, sort of moments. But I think, where this has potentially some traction, and maybe another direction that this is going, and I don't know on the staffing side, but thinking from more of a kind of public relations standpoint, I think one of the things that's going on here is, by using the idea of revisions, it makes it sound like they don't know what they're doing to a layperson, and it lets him cast doubt on numbers that he doesn't like and substitute his own. So yesterday, kind of the other thing that he did, he pulled out some other data from the Heritage Foundation, and started touting that in a press conference about these are the real numbers. And so, it could be that, BLS continues doing its thing, and at least publicly he says, hey, ignore those bozos. Here's the real data. And at least his constituents, I think, the folks that own red hats will eat that up. But for a lot of other people, that's not going to line up. But it does feel like, he's got a path here, even if he doesn't get sort of conformity out of BLS or other agencies, where it just lets him substitute his own reality.
Maybe, but I don't think that the his base, like the red hat wearing MAGA people, are really the primary consumers of BLS data. In fact, if he would stop talking about it, they probably wouldn't even know that it exists. And
Right.
I think the real consumers of it are the business community, the financial community, the Fed. And so I think if the BLS basically just brushes this episode off, lets it roll off their back, keeps collecting data in the normal way and publishing accurate statistics, I don't think it's going to matter that much if Trump is out there saying, well, the Heritage Foundation has the real data. Nobody who actually makes any use of that data is going to care about that. And if his base wants to believe that, what difference does it make? I mean, they would believe whatever he said with or without pointing to the Heritage Foundation. And so I don't know that matters that much. Another couple things I was going to say about the data itself.
Yeah.
One thing that was interesting is the BLS already was making moves, I think, to make its data collection and data analysis less accurate, even before Trump fired the chief. So just a week before that, BLS reduced data collection by 19%. They stopped all data collection in 3 of the cities that they had done it in before, which were Lincoln, Nebraska, Provo, Utah, and Buffalo, New York. They just completely shut down operations in those cities. In other cities where they still were doing data collection, they reduced all collections by about 15%. And what they had announced they were going to do is, so you get an overall reduction in data collection of about 20%, including the 15% across the board reductions, plus the elimination of 3 cities, and that they were in fact going to rely on statistical models that do estimates rather than hard data for a bigger part of their projections. So that sort of starving the BLS of some of its resources and forcing it to do more estimation and less collection, that was already underway even before the criticism and the firing of the chief. So it was actually a fact that because of essentially Doge initiatives, that the BLS statistics were in fact being made to be a little bit less accurate than in the past.
At which point you would expect bigger revisions.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know that would be, you'd expect him this first time because that all only started like a week earlier. But yeah, you'd expect him going forward. The other thing I was going to say about the revisions is I think actually, in a world where nobody's trying to bash the BLS, it was probably good that they got preliminary estimates out quickly and then revised them. But I think in the world we're living in now, I think that's actually a bad practice to continue. And I think they should not put preliminary estimates out as soon as they have been, given the likelihood that they're going to be revised and then someone's going to say that they were faking something up. Like, I think they should actually slow down their earliest releases and only release stuff after the period of time where they would have made that first round of revisions in the past.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I being somebody who's not a business decision maker, I don't, use these myself in any fast kind of fashion. But Yeah, I mean, there is sort of this accuracy timing trade-off, and so there is there's something to be said for getting that kind of out there quickly, I suppose, so people kind of have a sense of where things are going, other than just kind of what's in their immediate vicinity. But yeah, I agree. I mean, you are losing accuracy when you do that. I mean, these things take time, and so yeah, kind of. That may be, sort of a way around this. I mean, we've had people gripe about revisions in the past a little bit, but certainly not in the way that this one has been. This is a whole new waters. To backtrack a little bit, I'm inclined to think that at least some of Trump's issue here is kind of on that public perception side. Certainly presidents are judged by economic performance, and there's some debate about how much of that is sort of objective measures and how much of that is just perceptions, and the interconnection between those two, which is reasonably high. And frankly, the press coverage, around this. But I do think, I mean, if we look back to kind of, Trump during COVID and being so obsessed with, kind of economic things. I mean, some of it obviously is that, he doesn't want it to crash on his watch. I don't think he wants to burn down American business. But part of it, I think, really was, he was concerned about his reelection chances. And so, I think there is, these unemployment reports, they are sort of inflection points. Even if nobody remembers the exact numbers in them, they give a gist. And I think Trump is probably correctly recognizes that hey, there is some in terms of kind of my approval, there is some role for this here, and sort of undermining any data that reflects badly on me might have some political value. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the prescription then? Like what do you think that means the BLS should do?
Well, I mean, probably keep on keeping on, I suppose.
Yeah.
But the one thing I would add, actually, I cut myself off this time. But I think one place that I agree when we were going back to a point you made a minute ago, public perceptions of these are pretty politicized anyway. I need other hobbies, but I always, whenever like economic stuff comes out, I always look in the Facebook comments, and people are always able to find a cloud or a silver lining, in there. So, I mean, there's a lot of motivated reasoning amongst the public. So kind of, I mean, back to your point, I mean, yeah, probably none of this matters to MAGA, in reality, the rank and file folks, but, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've never had, to my recollection, a president that has sort of gone this hard at casting doubt on numbers from his own government.
Right.
This is kind of uncharted territory. So, in terms of a prescription, man, I don't know. That's a little trickier, because we just haven't seen much here. But I think it's concerning. I mean, just in some ways, I mean, once we've broached this at all, walking back from that's going to be very hard. Once we've kind of, just totally piled on, oh, this data is terrible, you can't believe them, etc. I mean, there's always people, and it's across the board, it's Democrats when there's a Democratic president, and Republicans when there's a Republican president. I mean, there's always people that have, kind of out there said, that, oh gosh, they must be cooking the books and, what have you. But to have it kind of coming from the top down in this forceful of a way, that's a bell that's going to be hard to unring.
Well, that's really the reason I was suggesting that they should not release the early preliminary results anymore.
No, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Although then when they stop doing that, I mean, then it becomes, what are they hiding?
Right.
I think
they just have to say, because we've had too many revisions. Yeah, that we've had too many revisions, and people, that because of the problem we've had with releasing early results and then having revisions dramatically change what they look like, for that reason, it's too misleading to release the preliminary results, and we'll wait until we've collected enough data and done enough analysis that we can stand by it.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad move. I mean, I'm always for kind of methodological transparency too, but that's the kind of thing that would make most people's eyes glaze over. So, I'm not sure that, that gets you too far. But gosh, even just to come out and explain kind of what revisions are and why they do them and things, because they're so, it's one of those things. I mean, it reminds me of people watching science during COVID. Like people that have never paid attention to science before, and you kind of have this very public vaccine and public health, development in real time, where, advice changes and things change along the way as we get new information, et cetera. And that freaks a lot of people out,
Right.
and so, when you have sort of lay people looking at these things, I mean, gosh, even just sort of a decent explainer, at least, again, you're not going to win over everybody, but like, this is how we do it. This is what a revision is, et cetera. Because this is in normal times a pretty obscure sort of thing, in a lot of ways. I mean, the inner workings of the BLS, when I started doing this podcast, that was not a topic that was on my mind as something that we'd ever be talking about, but here we are. So it's not, it's not something most people understand. It gets into some nuts and bolts that people either weren't interested in or haven't followed, et cetera. Some way to kind of explain what they do and why we should trust them, I think might help as well. But yeah, I mean, getting into a position where you don't have to do those revisions probably would instill a little more trust from the public.
Yeah, last thing I'll say, and then we got to get on to other topics. But
yeah, it is.
Interestingly, another sort of aspect of this is that I know we're not going to talk about the Fed this week, but one of the two dissenting Fed governors who wanted, one of the Trump governors who wanted the interest rates cut and who wrote an opinion explaining why that should be, basically argued that under the Fed's dual mandate, not only to control inflation, but also to fight unemployment, that unemployment is about to explode, and that's a reason that the interest rates should be cut. And so that actually does find support in the same BLS revised report that that Trump is bashing so much, right? That the BLS,
and all this is ironic because he's mad they won't cut interest rates, and this would actually get you to an interest rate cut.
But if he would have put more credibility in that BLS revised report instead of bashing it, it not only would provide an argument for cutting interest rates at the Fed, but it in fact did provide an argument for it in the dissenting opinion that one of his governors actually wrote.
Oh, gosh, I hadn't even thought of it that way, but yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, that's one way to get interest rates cut, is just have a lot of unemployment.
Yeah, well, and that's, again, I mean, that's, I think, kind of people's lay understandings of the economy, it is, I mean, those are things that you're always balancing. I mean, growth, inflation, and jobs are it's hard to do all of those at once. Or do those things well at once. I mean, you're often trading one for the other, and so we've got kind of ongoing trade developments here. We've been talking a lot lately about tariffs because certainly this is really the trade story, and we've got sort of any number of things. I think anything that you would want to jump on is okay in my book, but just sort of a couple things that we've seen in the last week or so. One is sort of some evidence that tariffs against India has led to them having a closer relationship in terms of buying oil from Russia, which, that's something that we've been sort of discouraging, to put it mildly. We have the kind of 50% tariffs on Brazil over dealing with their ex-president, who's currently awaiting trial for corruption. And we have had kind of a bunch of tariffs sort of take effect. Switzerland yesterday was certainly a big one. We have yet another pause on China, it looks like. So, at any rate, Ken, what do you think is interesting of that? We can hit all of those, or some of those, or something else, or whatever grabs your fancy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the sort of open embrace of tariffs for reasons that the law does not give them authority. I think is actually making it easier to see that the tariffs are going to be struck down by the courts. The only court that ever did really address them on the merits so far is a specialized court called the Court of International Trade, where a unanimous three-judge panel held that all of the tariffs are completely illegal. Now that ruling has not been implemented because it was stayed during the pendency of the appeal. The appeal has now been argued to another specialized court called the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which is a different federal court of appeals in D.C., separate from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which is the more well-known one. But court rulings of the Court of International Trade go to the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and that oral argument has already taken place. And by all accounts from the oral argument, it seems overwhelmingly likely that the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals is going to affirm the order of the Court of International Trade and again hold that all of these tariffs are illegal. And although the Supreme Court is very likely to take that, and the Supreme Court, has a penchant for trying to bail out Trump, I think the more he relies on some of the things you talked about, like, well, we're going to have tariffs against Brazil because they've got Bolsonaro on trial, or we're going to have tariffs against India because they're buying oil from Russia. These are not really things that are provided for in the statutes that give tariff authority, and it's even questionable whether whether the tariffs even whether the statutes do give tariff authority, or whether they really only give authority for certain kinds of economic sanctions, which may or may not include tariffs. So I think there's a lot of legal uncertainty that he's fanning here. And then I think also the other aspect of this that I think is interesting is the more mercurial he is, the more he just keeps changing things all the time. He's really signaling to all the international partners that they really can't actually make a deal with him. That all they can try to do
Right.
is flim flam him, which they are trying to do. But there's no benefit to doing anything else, because he's making it super clear he won't be bound by any deal, and he's going to continue to be completely mercurial and change things up from day to day. And there's nothing that he would ever say that would be final, that would be enforceable against him, and that they could rely on. And so it's actually he's sort of telegraphing the impossibility of making an actual deal, and that's why there've been zero actual deals.
Right. Zero deals. The framework of a deal or something, or
Yeah.
numbers on a numbers in a table. So, and I think, kind of to reiterate something you said. I mean, one thing that strikes me as really that mercurial nature of this, I think, really undercuts his legal arguments for most of these. If you kind of think about these statutes, in general, tariffs are the kind of thing that would be a Congress sort of thing, although Congress doesn't seem to want to do anything these days. But they have deferred under certain circumstances to the president, but those are supposed to be emergency situations. And the grounding on these is as an emergency was always pretty flimsy. The China initially was about fentanyl or something like that. The Canada ones were about fentanyl, which, again, don't take fentanyl. It's not good for you. But it is, I'm not sure that qualifies as an emergency, but if he can just keep staying, China's tariffs and keep changing them at random and things, and ultimately the public, language here is, and actually that's something I want to ask you about in a second, but the public language of these things is all over the place, but it's very much about trade imbalances and revenue and things like that. none of which is an emergency, as far as the statute goes. And so I feel like that really kind of undercuts any argument that he would have that, he's really doing these uh, in line with sort of the both the letter and the spirit of the law. Now, I was curious, since you are in the law field and I am not. Those public statements and things. Is that something that potentially has a bearing on the legal proceedings?
Oh yeah,
in terms
absolutely.
of motivation. I was a little unclear on that in some ways, but
Yeah, it has a huge bearing on it because it actually did come up in the Court of International Trade case and in the Federal Circuit case because to sort of start at the beginning, and Trump himself tries to conflate this a lot. There's really two different kinds of statutory authorities that he's been relying on. So there's trade statutes that give the president some flexibility to impose tariffs in trade disputes, for trade related reasons, and not for other reasons. And then there's a separate statute that he's been relying on probably more, called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And that allows the president to exercise certain, as the title says, emergency powers, emergency economic powers in response to international emergencies, which would generally not be trade related. So to use the tariff authority that he has under the trade statutes, he'd have to find something like, well, country X has imposed an unfair tariff on us in violation of the World Trade Organization or some other international agreement, and so to retaliate.
Or this could be like dumping and things like that.
Dumping and things like that, right? But, yeah, that in those kind of trade disputes, he's got some explicit authority to respond with tariffs to certain kind of trade related disputes. Now, he doesn't have any explicit authority to use tariffs to respond to other kinds of problems. So when he says, well, the reason we need a tariff against Canada is because 1% of the fentanyl that comes into the United States comes in through Canada, and that is an emergency. Well, be that as it may, that's not a trade dispute, and so he's relying on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Now, the Court of International Trade actually held that tariffs are not a tool that's even available under that statute. So the entire legal framework for relying on that statute that he's been using, the Court of International Trade said that the whole thing is illegal. But I think a more intermediate position might be that tariffs, depending what you call them, the same thing that you call tariffs, you could also call sanctions. And if you called them sanctions, they would be a recognized tool under the International Emergency Powers Act. So if you look at it that way, which would be a little bit more lenient towards presidential power than the Court of International Trade was, you'd still have the court looking at, so was there an international emergency? And there, I think, it would certainly be incumbent upon the White House to identify what was the emergency, and that does give the court some role in judging whether that's a bona fide emergency. Now, there's going to be some uncertainty about what's the standard of review. I think some people have argued that because of the end of the Chevron doctrine and the recent Loper-Bright case, that the court would have to interpret the International Emergency Economic Powers Act for itself without giving deference to the president's interpretations, and so that the court should simply be deciding, is this a bona fide emergency, irrespective of what the president has said. Other people would look at that and say, well, the president's still going to get some deference there, but it's not infinite deference. So if he's saying things that are implausible, he doesn't have to be deferred to. And so definitely under either of those standards, the justification that he provides is relevant. And so the public statements that he's made are part of the justification that he's provided. Whether he's going to get some deference or no deference, ultimately the court's going to have to be persuaded that there is an emergency that justifies triggering the emergency powers. So if the reasons that he states,
do you think there are situations where they would defer? Or is he going to lose on all of these? Do you think, or?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what all of the justifications are for all of the countries. I could actually
tell me about every country in the world, please. Yeah.
I could see the strongest ground that he has that I'm aware of probably would be in the recent tariffs against India. because I think that we actually do have trade sanctions against Russia based on a bona fide, what I would consider the bona fide national emergency or international emergency of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so I think it's legitimate for the U.S. to use emergency economic powers to take sanctions against Russia and to use emergency economic powers based on that bona fide emergency to try to make those sanctions be effective. So if we have trading partner like India that's undermining the sanctions that we legitimately took in response to an international emergency, I think that's legitimate. I'm not saying I favor the 50% tariffs against India. I really don't.
Right.
But I think as a legal matter, I think it's more defensible than say the ones against Canada for the pretextual reason of a little bit of fentanyl, or especially against the Brazil for the utterly illegitimate reason that they're criminally prosecuting one of their own politicians for reasons Trump doesn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Which in no respect could be seen as an international emergency.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
This episode is brought to you by Chevrolet. Chevy certified service technicians are factory trained to fit your vehicle with the tires specifically developed for it. And with our tire price match guarantee, you get the best fit for the best deal. Let us do the work. Available on select eligible tire brands at participating dealers only. Offer ends 12/31/2025. Terms apply. See dealer for complete details. Visit Chevrolet.com/service to learn more.
Yeah, so I think the probably what'll end up being the last thing we talk about today is kind of the ongoing redistricting fight, which I know got talked about last week, and gosh, I think Joey and I talked about it the week before. So we have kind of Texas under Trump's strong suggestion wants to do a midterm redistricting, which again is not necessarily new. They did this back in 2003 in Texas as well, although it certainly runs counter to tradition. Where things have really hit the come to a head in this week is that actually, much like 2003, Texas Democrats have fled the state, this time to Illinois, to deny a quorum to the special session for redistricting. You now have the FBI apparently looking for them. You have the governor suing them and wanting to remove the minority leader, et cetera. And you also have then a number of Democratic states pushing back that they're kind of opening up the possibility of redistricting themselves to essentially strengthen the position of Democrats in those states in terms of the number of seats. So I had kind of said a couple weeks ago, I certainly have mixed feelings about this. I have maybe worse feelings about it now. My thought, frankly, at the time, and to some extent, I still sort of think this, is that probably the Republicans are going to overreach, and it may actually blow up in the midterms, because a lot of these districts are going to be, more weakly Republican. You're spreading Republicans out, and if you get kind of something a little bigger than a typical out party vote in a midterm, you run the risk of losing a bunch of those districts that you had drawn up. On the other hand, kind of the less partisan part of me, or just kind of more theoretical part, is really not a fan of gerrymandering at all, and sort of the certainly language used around it now, as well as sort of the tactics coming from the Texas governor that seem rather heavy-handed. So, Ken, I thought maybe want to put the question to you, because I'd like to, when I have people with more law expertise, Oh, is there a federal issue here? I mean, Trump is, are the kind of runaway Texas Democrats, are they actually sort of in jeopardy by being picked up by the FBI, or is that just sort of uh, dog and pony show sort of thing?
Well, that's a dog and pony show, but there are some threats that are a little more serious than that. No, there's no federal law at issue, and the FBI will not be involved in picking anybody up, and certainly the FBI has not said that it will. I think the only person who has said anything like that is U.S. Senator John Cornyn, and he was even very careful to hedge his language about what the FBI's role is. He said that the FBI may get involved in assisting the Texas authorities with locating the Democrats. He's not saying that the FBI is going to go arrest any Democrats. It would be
it's also even the location part of it. I mean, we know where they are.
We know where they are exactly. Yeah. So that really means literally nothing. That's just purely an idle, vain threat.
But then presumably the Texas authorities don't have any authority in Illinois to bring him back. Is that correct?
Right. They can request extradition. They don't have any authority to go there, and they could probably be arrested for kidnapping if they tried. They do have authority to request extradition if they actually charge the Democrats with any crimes. I don't believe that they have, and I'm not aware of any. I don't know Texas law that well, but I'm not aware of any crimes that they could charge them with. But and that would have to come first. Like they'd have to charge these people with crimes in Texas, and then they could request extradition, and then that would, under our Constitution, put the Illinois authorities under some obligation to participate in the extradition. But that would be the Illinois authorities, not the Texas authorities. So I don't think any of that's going to happen at all. That's just a sheer dog and pony show. I think the couple things that are possibly more for real. There are the Texas Attorney General has filed a few court actions. One, I think, not so serious. One, a little bit more serious. The court action that I think is not serious is one in Southern Illinois. I think he filed in Quincy, Illinois, which is about 300 miles away from Chicago, where they actually are. But I think he thought he might have a chance of getting Republican judges or Republican jurors down there. But he basically filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction from an Illinois court to order these people to return to Texas. I don't think that's going anywhere either. But the one that I think is actually serious is he's filed something in Texas to have the seats declared vacant. And I don't know Texas law that well, but it doesn't seem implausible to me that if you have legislators that are making themselves unable to be located and that can't show up for work, that at some point there should be some possible mechanism for declaring the seats vacant. I don't know if that's going to work or not, and I'd have to know Texas law better than that. But I could just say all the other ones seem like obviously going nowhere, whereas that one seems to me like there's a given it's Texas law, it's Texas judges, everybody's Republican down there that's going to be involved in deciding this. And this would not involve sending anybody into Illinois or anything like that. I think that might be.
You're just not legislators anymore.
Yeah. I wouldn't rule that one out of hand, but I'd have to do further study to really figure out whether that's a colorable claim or not.
Yeah, I do wonder. As you're talking about that, the thought that I had was the Adam Clayton Powell Jr. case from years ago in Congress, where he was expelled basically for not being around. More or less, he spent several years in the Caribbean apparently, and was unseated. I mean, I wonder if the Texas legislature. Yeah, but without a quorum, I don't know that they could take action, but in terms of, typically legislative bodies have the ability to expel members, for.
Yeah, well, in this case, I don't think they could. I don't think the legislature could expel them because that would be an action that they don't have a quorum to take. But
right, well, exactly.
But,
you could get Adam Clayton Powell because he was just one guy on vacation, but you can't. You still had a quorum, so
right. And of course, the Supreme Court reversed that with Adam Clayton Powell, though that was on federal grounds that wouldn't apply necessarily in Texas. But I think the court declaring the seats vacant would be a path that has seems viable. it's going to depend on the what the Texas law actually has to say about that. But the court is going to have a quorum. The legislature is not going to have a quorum as long as these people aren't there, and so they're not going to be able to expel anyone. But a court could invalidate a court could hold the seat as now vacant because it's been abandoned. So so I think that would be it. The Powell case, if since you raised it, maybe I'll tell the listeners what the legal issues were. But they won't apply here though. So Adam Clayton Powell III was actually the first African American elected to the Congress after the Reconstruction. So during the Reconstruction, when the Union Army was still occupying the South, many African Americans were elected to Congress from those southern states. But after the Reconstruction ended in 1877, we went all the way till the early 1960s before another African American got elected, and that was Adam Clayton Powell. He got elected from Harlem in New York City, from that district in Upper Manhattan. And after he got reelected and then reelected again, and he came back for his third term, the House voted to expel him from his seat. And I remember that the stated reasons. I don't know that it was excessive absenteeism, but I think it did have to do with some trips that he took, as you thought. But I thought it was more related to that they accused him of taking money from donors and then using that to take trips. So it would have been
that could be my recollection of this is gosh, almost 30 years old.
Yeah.
But I had a con law professor that kept ranting about Bimini, where he was on the beach. And
no, he did take trips to the beach, but I don't think the stated reason was excessive absenteeism. I think the stated reason was based on who paid for the trips. So they found that he some sort of low level corruption, and they voted to expel him. And he took the case to the Supreme Court, and on technical grounds that would only apply to the U.S. Congress and that would not apply to state legislators. The U.S. Supreme Court found, and actually I got to correct one thing I just said wrong. They didn't vote to expel him. They voted to exclude him. So exclusion is different than expulsion. Yeah. So expulsion happens when you've already been seated. Exclusion happens when you come to take your seat. And so even though he had already served 2 terms, it's when he came to swear in for his 3rd term that they excluded him. And that did end up being highly relevant in the Supreme Court's disposition, because what the Supreme Court found is that exclusion could only take place in the Congress under the qualifications clauses, so that a member, if a member was unqualified, they could be excluded. But the only basis for finding a member unqualified would be that they lacked the constitutional qualifications. In other words, that they either were not a U.S. citizen, or they were not a resident of the state where they resided, or they were not 25 years old, or they were not, in fact, elected. But that anyone who met all 4 of those qualifications, they could not be excluded. So that's a U.S. constitutional thing about So that really wouldn't apply at all to Texas. Texas's constitution might or might not have that. And also, this wouldn't be exclusion. This would be expulsion, because these people were already seated back in January. So I don't know. But I think the problem with expulsion here would just be the one you identified, which is that it would take having a quorum. And as long as all the Democrats stay away, there's no quorum.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think, the problem. In some ways, if I were if I were advising the Texas governor, it would have been smarter to try this during the normal session rather than the special session, because you can't really claim they're shutting down any other business. You have a potentially pretty good PR tool there, if you can say, well, look at all these important things that aren't getting done because these people have fled the state. But when it's only this, which is also how this went down in 2003. You pretty much lose that. And I think some of it is just that Trump didn't get interested in this until later, and Abbott wasn't interested in it until Trump was interested. But, there's really not much incentive to come back if you can't really be compelled. At some point, you might want to vote on something else, at which point you would, come back and have a quorum. But
I think there would be,
aren't there here.
I totally agree with that, including I totally agree with your assessment that the reason it happened when it happened is because the the Texas powers that be weren't really concocting this, but then suddenly it was Trump that started banging the drum for it, and then they had to do it right away, but they weren't in a regular session. But actually, even if, I mean, even if it was a regular session, the fact is the Democrats in Texas have so little power that the Republicans can enact whatever they want. And so there's really there's no purpose for the Democrats actually staying put and being there. Like, I think the idea,
in fact, actually, their best move might just be to deny them quorum forever. Across everything.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably lead quickly to some kind of state constitutional amendment that would take away their power to do that if they were really going to do it forever. But
it's facetious, but it's
But I think,
but as a minority party, it's like, what do you have at that point in Texas, but not showing up?
Right. So but I think given that the main thing at issue here is the redistricting, and that there's really no other issues, even if this were a regular session, and even if there were some issues that the Democrats had an interest in, like they don't have enough strength to really have their views accommodated. If the Republicans want to pass legislation, they don't need to make compromises with Democrats in Texas. So the Democrats really have no incentive to be at the table.
Right. I would just add, before we move on to kind of one other thing, just as a proud son of Springfield, Illinois, this denying, leaving to deny quorum is not exactly a new thing. Abe Lincoln actually jumped out a second-story window when he was a state rep in Illinois as part of Illinois Republicans leaving back in the 1850s to shut down a vote on something. So, and he's on money, for gosh sakes. So, we have a long, proud tradition of this sort of thing. One other thing I wanted to maybe hit on quickly here, because we do have a little time left. And in some ways, this brings us perhaps full circle, because it's sort of partly an electoral story, but it is also partly a data story. And that is Trump in it was either a tweet or Truth Social. They're not tweets anymore, but anyway, mentioned laying out wanting to do an accurate census and essentially pushing the Census Bureau to, with all haste, sort of redo the census, particularly in light of things we learned about the 2024 election, none of which he mentioned specifically. I will say, in typical Trump fashion, it's really unclear what he's asking for here, whether this is sort of changes to the 2030 census, whether this is like a new census in between, but kind of the main thing that he's pushing for here is to exclude non-citizens from the count, which would have, in much the same way that this redistricting business does, would have pretty profound impacts both on sort of the composition of the House, but also presumably the Electoral College. Redistricting doesn't really matter for the Electoral College, except in Maine and Nebraska, and even there probably doesn't really matter as a practical sense. But this would have pretty big implications for that. It would also be a huge change from how we've always done it. If you look at the constitutional language, it is all persons except non-taxed Indians is who's to be counted in that census. We do this census every 10 years and have not added in between. It's not clear that you could do another census between now and then, but it also feels very much like kind of that perfect storm of Trump and sort of data manipulation and also kind of pulling out all the stops to entrench power. Ken, I know there is some case law around the census. This issue has come up, kind of in the past in terms of who counts. So, what are your thoughts on sort of the legal status of anything like this, with the caveat that what he said is pretty vague, apart from he doesn't want to count a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the two legal issues that you mentioned are, one would be the timing of an off-year census, and one would be whether to count all persons or just some persons. So I could start that by reading the language of Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which does address both of those things. So the first sentence of it, just to say sort of what the purposes of the census is, says representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. Right now, the direct taxes thing is less relevant nowadays, but the representatives. So the number of Congress members that each state gets is reflecting the number of people that are living in that state. So that's the census is highly relevant to that. Then it goes on to say the actual enumeration shall be made. At first, it says within 3 years after the first Congress. So that was just, when would the first census be?
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, and within every subsequent term of 10 years. So the number 10 years is in the Constitution. I guess, technically the word within is there. So I suppose Trump could very aggressively read that to say it's okay to do it sooner than 10 years. It's not.
I guess
it's
kind of in line with the
longer.
redistricting. Traditionally we don't, but apparently, it doesn't say, it says you have to do it every 10, but it doesn't say you can't do it more often. But
yeah, it says within every 10. But certainly there's a long-standing original understanding of that. Universal going all the way back that means every 10.
We've never done it any other way.
We've never done it any other way, and we do have a statute as well. It's Title 13, Section 9 of the U.S. Code, which gives sort of more details about how the census is done, and that does actually say it's every 10. So, again, Congress could change a statute, but they haven't, and the president can't just change a statute, although Trump often says that he can. But I think the statute, I would say, is in complete conformity with the constitutional language that says within every subsequent term of 10 years, and the statute just says it's every 10 years. So I don't think we can have. Maybe he can do a census sooner, but I don't think you could have a reapportionment of representatives sooner. Then the other thing about who gets counted. Article 1, Section 2 didn't specify that, but the 14th Amendment does. So Section 2 of the 14th Amendment says that when we're determining the respective numbers of the several states for census purposes, that has to be determined by, and now I'm reading a quote from 14th Amendment Section 2, counting the whole number of persons in such state, excluding Indians not taxed. So it's the whole number of persons. So certainly it absolutely is meant to include people who don't vote. For instance, children are counted in the census and they don't vote. Women were always counted in the census even before we had the 19th Amendment, even before women could vote. People who aren't registered to vote are counted in the census. So counting the whole number of persons has always been understood not to be limiting it to counting the number of eligible voters. And the phrase "whole number of persons" is pretty unambiguous. So I would think,
and just to be clear, that's essentially repealing the 3/5 compromise.
Yes, that's an important point. So
where that comes from is that kind of as I was thinking about this, the one limit that we have had is that we only count 3/5 of the slave population, but when you get to those Reconstruction amendments, you're undoing that. So that's well,
actually I was going to say that to me the even more instructive thing about what you just said is that meant they had to count the slaves even before, right? So when they had the 3/5 compromise, that meant that they had
just round them down, but they had to count them.
You had to count them, right? So the census actually had to count slaves, even though it was thought that slaves not only were not citizens, but part of we the people, who are in the preamble of the Constitution, but yet they still had to be counted. Now then their numbers had to be divided by 3/5, but the 3/5 compromise.
Well, that's a great, I'd never thought of that, but that's a great point, is that you are counting them.
Yeah, they had to be counted, right? Then the numbers just had to be divided by 3/5. So even when we had slavery, we had a tradition that the census had to count every person, including every slave. And really the significance of the 14th Amendment Section 2 language, as you pointed out, is that it gets rid of dividing by 3/5. You still have to count all the people, and now every person counts for purposes of representation. So I have to say, I think that this Supreme Court might be hyper technical enough that they might go along with within every 10 years could mean sooner than 10 years. But I think that there's just absolutely no way around counting the whole number of persons in each state. And I just don't see how you could do a census that excludes undocumented aliens.
Yeah, and I'm certainly I'm not generally a textualist, but disposition, but gosh, the plain text right there. I mean, it's really hard to read that any other way. Would be my general sense of that. So, I mean, the other thing here, kind of in terms of do we do a census more often, is just the practicality. They are already kind of laying the groundwork for the 2030 census. It takes that long, and back to kind of earlier discussions of data. If BLS data is a heavy lift, census data is monumental in terms of the effort that goes into it, to the point where they hire enough people that it actually is reflected in the unemployment. The temp workers, like you see a drop in unemployment when they start the census and a bump when they end it most years. So kind of the notion of doing anything other than a completely half-assed census off of that 10-year term as a practical matter seems pretty unlikely. I mean, this may be sort of a signal for 2030 or something like that. Or it could just
he doesn't care about 2030 though. He only cares about this midterm election.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it could also just be old man on the internet after bedtime, which is what a lot of these things seem to be sometimes.
Yeah. In fact, one other thing you just reminded me of when you talked about the large number of people that have to be hired to conduct the census is Congress would have to do a supplemental appropriation of funds for that. So the president doesn't have access to the funds that it would take to hire all those people. And the census usually does get a fairly large supplemental appropriation every 10 years. Now, this president, more than any predecessor he's ever had, I think, violates the Anti-Deficiency Act every day and spends money that hasn't been appropriated. But, at some point, the plug is going to get pulled on that kind of thing, I think. And I just don't really see how he could even get started hiring the large numbers of people into jobs that Congress has not appropriated any salaries for.
Right. Well, on that note, I think that brings us about to a close. So, Ken, it was a pleasure talking with you, as always. If there was anything we discussed on this episode that you disagreed with, or that you have a question about, or that you really liked, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is mail@politicsguys.com, spelled exactly like it sounds. And you can also reach us through Facebook or X. The links are in the show notes. We also have a Discord discussion for our supporters, which Michael is on all the time. And I'm now on a little bit because, gosh, I'm not squandering enough time on the internet as it is. You can support us on Patreon, where you can even sign up for a free trial. If you sign up to join us on Patreon as a supporter, you'll get ad-free versions of everything we release, the full-length midweek episode instead of just a preview, access to our Politics Guys Discord group, where you can interact with multiple hosts and some certainly good discussion folks in there as well. If a monthly Patreon contribution is too much of a commitment, you've got issues with Patreon, or you are a current supporter that just wants to give us a little extra one-shot contribution, we also have PayPal and Venmo support options as well. You can find links to all of that in politicsguys.com/support on the web, as well as in the show notes. If you'd like to get our full-length midweek episode, but you're not in a position to financially support the podcast right now, just email Mike at politicsguys.com, and he'll be happy to set that up for you. Whether you're a supporter or not, we appreciate if you could like, subscribe, rate, and review on whatever podcast app you're using, as well as share our episodes on social media. And finally, we have a very special thanks to our executive producers, Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Mataza, and Jody Marie Miller. We'll be back with a new episode next week, and we hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,